Hi guys, remember I told you we're going to spend a day remembering how to factor from our worksheet that we had to turn in 10.5. If you did not turn in that worksheet, make sure you do so. I just put it missing in the grade book, but you can still turn it in if you have not done so. So our I can statement today is I can factor. We're just going to do like one or two of each of these, and then you guys will be responsible to finish them up. But the first one is, it just says distribute, FOIL, show your work. So back to Algebra 1, when I first, outside, inside, and last, or expand this binomial, I end up with this. And then I have some like terms in the middle that I need to add together in order to get my quadratic. Okay, so then the other ones are just like that. You guys are going to go ahead and FOIL those. All right, now that you're done with that, we are going to answer a couple more of these questions. It says, what two numbers multiply to give question mark? List all possible options involving integers. Don't forget about your negative numbers. So this is where your factor pair sheet comes into play. So everyone got a factor pair sheet. It's just a multiplication table that shows you what numbers multiply in order to get to a number. So our first one says, list all possible integers that multiply to give us the number 80. So 80 is on the back side, and if I take a look at it, I get 1 and 80, 2 and 40, 4 and 20, 5 and 16, and then 8 and 10. Okay, so those are just the possible ways to end up with the number 80. Okay, and that's all it's asking for, is you to go through here and figure out, by using your factor pair chart, which ones end up giving you the number. Now, what about we have a negative number? Okay, so this next one says, what numbers multiply to give you negative 60? So you can still use your factor pair chart, and 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, and 6 and 10. Again, I'm just copying off that factor pair chart. Now, in order to get a negative number when you multiply, remember, one of these numbers has to be negative. So I'm just going to put the negative on the first one, because that's where it fits. But keep in mind that you can also have the negative on the second one, just in case you need to get a higher negative number. So go ahead and finish up those other ones, figuring out what multiplies to give you the negative numbers, and then we'll move on to figure out multiply and add. So as I look at my factor pair chart for the number 80, it asks which numbers multiply to 80 and give us 24 when we add. So we look at our factor pair chart, and I'm looking at 80, and I see 4 times 20. 4 times 20 adds to 80, multiplies to 80, and it also adds to 24. Okay, so that satisfied exactly what the question was asking me to do. Okay, now let's skip down to the next one. We're talking about a negative 60 and a negative 11. So look at your factor pair chart, find the number 60, check out which one really would give us the negative 11. So if I'm looking at it, I see a 4 and a 15. So that's going to multiply to 60. What do I have to do in order to get a negative 11 when I add? Well, I have to add the negative onto the 15. So you guys go through and try to figure out the rest of those, and then we'll flip it over to the back side. Okay, now on the back side, we're actually going to factor. Okay, so the first step here, it tells me to FOIL. So all I have to do is go first, outside, inside, and last. And then don't forget what's over here on the right side of the equal sign. That's a negative 8. And then when we go ahead and we add our like terms, I end up with this equation. And my next step says set it equal to 0. So we want x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the way to do that is we have to add the 8 to the other side. So we end up with x squared plus 3x minus 10 equals 0. Our next step, it tells me to factor. So now we got to look at our factor pair chart at the number 10, and we need to figure out the two numbers that multiply to negative 10, but they need to add to a positive 3. So we're going to multiply to negative 10, add to a positive 3. And if you can remember, when we factor, we have two sets of parentheses, and since the x squared number is 1, we just have both x's at the start of our parentheses. So we're looking at the number 10, and I see 5 and 2. 5 and 2 are the ones that are going to give me the 3, but which one's positive and which one's negative? Well, if I want a positive 3, that means my bigger number has to be positive. So positive 5, negative 2. And then it says set both sets of parentheses equal to 0. So we're going to do this real quick, but you're going to notice that you don't have to really do this step because they just come out as opposite integers. So x is negative 5 and x is positive 2. Okay, so that's how you do the other two. And then let's take a look at these ones. Okay, it says solve, show your work. You won't have to factor all of them to solve. So let's take a look at this first one. This first one, or none of them, are equal to 0. And so in order to get it equal to 0, we're going to have to subtract 2x from both sides. And we'll have to add the 15. I like to do this all in one step if you can. It makes it a little bit shorter. So I end up with x squared plus 8x plus 15 equals 0. I couldn't add the 15 to anything because there wasn't anything like it on the other side. There was only x's and x squareds. So now I look at my factor pair chart for the number 15. I want to multiply to 15, and I want to add to the number 8. So as I look at 15, I see 3 and 5. 3 and 5 looks like the ones that I'm going to have to use, and they're both going to be positive. Why? Because I have all pluses in my equation. There's no negatives in my equation, so I don't have to change any signs. And then if you look, your answers are going to come out as negative 5 and negative 3. Okay, let's do one of these hard ones down here. Okay, let's take a look at this one right here. So the first thing I have to do is some distributing on this side. So I end up with x squared plus 4x on the left side. The right side I end up with x squared plus 2x plus 1x plus 2. And now I know I need to get it equal to 0. So let's first combine some like terms over here on the right side and clean that up a little bit, which means then I just have to copy down the left side in order to keep everything in order and looking nice. My next step would be I'm going to take these terms over here because there's less of them. So I'm going to minus the x squared, and I'm going to minus the 4x. Does everybody see how I am keeping everything in line, making sure that this is equal to 0? This actually becomes 0. This is negative 1x, and then I have a plus 2. Well, look at that. My x squareds have went away, so I don't need to factor. Just like the directions set up above, you may not need to factor some of these. So I'm just going to go ahead and add the 1x to the other side, just like I would back in Algebra 1. And I get 1x equals 2. Divide by 1. My answer is 2. So not all of them you need to factor. You just have to work through them and see which answers you can get.